I was eating dinner with Panal Dave in the Netherlands, and he went and did the all-vegetarian thing, and I'm like, well, I have to do vegetarian too at the same exact time because I can't be eating a steak in front of.
Yeah.
And we got lucky in that the restaurant had fantastic vegetarian food. I was very happy. And then the very next day, I go out with a whole bunch of people, and what do they proceed to do? Order steaks right in front of Panal. I was like, oh, come on now, you can know. That's not right.
Oh, I do that with my daughter because she's been experimenting with veganism, and I'm like, oh, look, beef.
My son's a vegetarian right now. He was a vegetarian for a few years ago, but he's back to that. But luckily, he does not want to be a vegan. I find that the vegan thing would be fairly challenging for growing kids.
Even vegetarian is tough.
No, vegetarian, as long as you're a lacto-ovo vegetarian, so you still have dairy and eggs, then it's a complete, as long as you're having like complete proteins like rice and beans in meals. The pediatrician said there's no concerns with lacto-ovo vegetarians, but vegans, they are missing nutrition.
That's not all they're missing. And there go 5 of our listeners, right, like that. Although I would make vegan jokes, but we're not going to go there. Ron says, I'm a vegetarian. My cows eat grass. Yes. Vegetables are what food eats. I like that. All right, so we'll go ahead and get to the technical questions. So let's see here. Paul says, one of the databases that I monitor is 200 gigs in size, but it only has one file. Should I go ahead and split that up across multiple files? Terry, you're the DBA on the call. It's you.
Yeah, you too. I mean, it's really unnecessary, unless you have special disks, special layout where you can add a file, and some of your objects will be on that file. So if you have some faster disks and you want to move some of your heavily read tables, then move them over to another file. You're adding another file group. But size of database doesn't really mean you have to have more than one data file.
Yeah. Jason says, does anyone have any suggestions on a solution for security auditing for SQL Server? Should I use in-house or third-party options?
I have no idea. I feel like the clients that have auditing, that there's performance issues.
Yeah, you really, what I tell people is, do you have to defend yourself in front of a lawyer and a judge? Is this going to be something where you have to legally defend yourself in court? And if you do, then that kind of guides the solution that you're going towards, because you shouldn't have something that a DBA can turn off, something that can lose events really easily. So this kind of rules out a lot of things that you would roll yourself, because you would be a suspect. You have to be able to stand in court and say there wasn't a problem. So if you have to be legally defensible, I'm a huge fan of third-party appliances like Imperva or Guardium. These are big, expensive appliances that sit in between SQL Server and the rest of the network, and they log every network packet. They track who sees what, because it's not just a matter of who does inserts, updates, and deletes. It's a matter of who sees whose patient's records, for example. And there is an overhead with that. It's not usually huge, but those things are 6 figures a piece. Whereas when you go roll your own, there's usually all kinds of overhead, even if you're using SQL Server's auditing, and it's not going to be legally defensible in most cases. So that's just the first place that I would start. You have to defend yourself in front of a court. If you don't have to, if you don't care about anything legally defensible, go buy Idera's SQL Compliance Manager. And I'm not saying that it's not legally defensible, but I'm saying that it's about like $1,000, $2,000. You install it, and then it just logs to a file. Sure, you could get around it, but at least that way you've checked the box and you can go on with your life. Let's see, Michael says, what am I teaching and doing today at the client location? We just finished a parameter sniffing class, and I don't actually know what we're talking about next. I have to go look at the, but it's all database developers in the room today, so I'm doing a lot of T-SQL type stuff. Yeah. So between Richie and I, Richie's dancing and laughing like for database developers, but Richie is also inheriting a hot mess of SQL that I have over in our current production environment that I have.
Please tell them what happened this weekend, Brent. Please share with the class what went on this weekend.
So I use queries behind Power BI. I use Power BI to build a little dashboard. So for SQL Constant Care, I can tell people, hey, here's the problem you're having. Here's the issues behind it.
And it's great. And it's great. It's
well,
awesome.
No. Richie's been hearing me complain about Power BI. It's the only thing we have.
Like
it's pretty cool. It's gorgeous. It helps me get to answers quickly. But it all depends on the quality of my queries. My queries are not very good, and I was pointing at a specific replica rather than pointing at a generic reader name like an AG listener. And so when we were running both production and my Power BI queries on the same replica, I may have caused our production servers to fail over multiple times. Trying to troubleshoot why the server's having problems, and then I'm like, oh, it turns out.
Yeah, but you know, I mean, because of the way we've architected it, it was really easy for us to recover those files and then, you know, push them out, and so nobody lost any data, nobody didn't get their messages, and that's the great part about working in the cloud and in this type of environment. Hey, something fails, we just push it right back through, and hey, it goes and it finishes. That is, you know, that's been a lot of fun. It's like, oh, it failed, oh, no problem, just push it right back through.
Chase says, I was a vegan at 15. You have to see your nutritionist. Yes. Otherwise, you'll turn out like Chase, and we can't have that. Andy Leonard asks a serious question. He says, have y'all played with SQL Server in containers? And we laugh, but, oh, man. No, so the serious answer is no. No, that's not true. I did play with them. I just stopped.
I mean, is Aurora running on container? I would assume that it is, so technically, yeah.
Well, it's not SQL Server, though. But
it's not SQL Server.
Yeah. It doesn't solve a problem for us. I get that somewhere somebody has a problem that containers solve. I just haven't seen it yet. Oh, well, that's not true. Continuous integration, continuous deployment. That totally makes sense. I mean, makes sense. I get it. But for the rest of people, for production SQL servers, I haven't seen the problem that it solved yet where people went, oh, we could put this in a container and it's cool now. Let's do it. I haven't seen that, and we work mostly on production servers. So
okay, and let's qualify that for continuous integration. Yes, continuous deployment. I'm not sure. I don't think so, because continuous deployment. Now we're going to deploy the database again, and what happens to the data that's currently in production? And so yes, continuous integration where I need to restore to a state. And all I have to do is just wipe out what's currently there and rebuild it. Yeah, that's fine. But, you know, scripts work too. Just saying.
Pablo asks a question, and I'm going to reword Pablo's question just a little. He has an application where a heap is the main table, and the application constantly deletes rows in the heap. Does he need to do any kind of index maintenance on that heap? And if so, how should he do it?
Why is it a heap? That's my question.
Because he's not allowed to change it, but I'm with you. And why would you want to get it away from a heap?
Well, I mean, you know, heaps are great for writes, but not for reads. You know, clustered indexes are better for OLTP environments where read performance matters. Not allowed to change structure. That's an odd sentence, because you're switching from a heap to a clustered index. I wouldn't really consider that changing. I mean, it does change structure, obviously, behind the scenes, but who is giving that kind of mandate? But anyways, alter table rebuild, you know, you might need that.
That sucks. Wilfred says, we're having analysis services problems, and we know that's not something you do, but could you recommend a consultant, preferably Europe-based, who we could contact? Yeah, Bob Duffy of prodata.ie, I think is the company's name, but if you search for Bob Duffy ProData, he's based out of Ireland and does a lot of analysis services stuff. Jason follows up on the auditing question. He says, well, we don't need to defend ourselves in court, but we need to get audited by a company. We're really just checking the accounts that have access, not all of the traffic. So it comes down to whether or not you would, and I would really have this discussion with your security or legal team, would we have to defend ourselves in court for it? Because like Enron got audited by an external company, Arthur Andersen, and they passed all those audits with flying colors, but of course you know how that goes. Chris says, I'm finally switching to extended events. I have a few current extended event sessions logging to a file. is there an easy way to view the results other than xQuery? I don't think any of us know of an easier way. Maybe there's a third-party tool, like I think Idera had an ended events tool, but I haven't used it. Oh, Ron asks, contained databases, good, bad, or ugly?
Yes.
Did you ever use contained databases?
Nope.
Why?
Nope. And in fact, when I do remember a specific moment where I was introduced to them, I was at a code camp, and my initial thought was, that's stupid. Why would you do that? And if you're moving stuff up to the cloud, then it makes perfect sense. But if you're not doing that on a regular basis, then what's the benefit, right? I mean, that's the question. Well, what's the benefit for going to this specific technology? That's usually what I ask. Well, what am I getting out of this? And if you're not doing any of that, having that portability, it's more hassle than anything else.
It's not really like databases are usually portable either. There's usually agent jobs and other stuff outside of the databases, SSIS packages that you end up having to move around. So it seemed like a really neat idea, but just wasn't finished with execution. And like a lot of features, they just launch it, and then when nobody picks it up, they just dump it. Ron says, I'm looking to take an on-premises database to the cloud. I don't contain, if you just change an existing database to be contained, I don't think that's going to be enough. You usually have things like linked servers you have to worry about, all kinds of other stuff. Stephanie says, for the extended events thing, export the extended events to a table and query them normally. Ooh, I like that. You could set up an agent job if you know, because he did say that he had a few sessions that he ran on a regular basis. You could set up an agent job to regularly import those. I kind of like that.
You could transform them into JSON, and you could just like run JSON queries up against them.
Oh,
Sounds fun.
Just when you thought xQuery couldn't get any worse. Sri asks, how do we explain LiveLock to users in layman terms? Assuming you mean a third-party product called LiveLock, you
I was going to say, I don't know what that is. Is it a typo?
Is that LifeLock? Is that what that is?
That's the thing where they lock your social security number, right?
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah, I don't think any of us have heard of that one before. I would call your salesperson. Sean says, Sean has a big long question. Basically, should I add a second vSCSI adapter? Because this is a kind of a long question, I would post it on dba.stackexchange.com. That'll help people understand better where you're going with that. Andy says, we're experimenting with using containers for SSIS testing. See, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, spinning up a database, you spin up a sample ETL source database and a sample ETL target database, and you do ETL between the two.
Yeah. I mean that makes total sense. I mean, and even if I just want to have an SSIS database just to run things off, and my source and my destinations aren't living in that container, even that might make sense. And depending on where I want to spin it up, how frequently is it for different clients, things like that. I get that. Yeah, I buy that. But Andy's a smart guy, so there you go.
You're just saying that because he lives in West Virginia, and you probably are in Virginia, but he has a gun. Probably.
West Virginia, I'd be like, well, maybe, but no. I mean, Andy's a smart guy. I mean, I remember walking into one of his SIS courses, and I'm like, whoa, this is some good stuff. How'd you figure all this stuff out? It's not in the manual, that's for sure.
Because the SSIS packages I used look like a kid with a crayon on a marker. I have no idea what I'm doing. Thomas posts a big long question with a big old error messages. Go ahead and post that on Stack Exchange. Just not usually a good fit to dig into with a Q&A format.
I replied to his earlier question. He had the same question above. Most of it's an error message about SQL Server not being available, just that generic error, and saying 99% of the time it works. The other times it gets that error. So I posted my blog post with thread pool weights. Is it a network issue or thread pool? So you take a look at that link, and if you didn't receive the link, you have to search on our site for thread pool with my name on it. There's a blog post from last year, I think, on the topic.
It's really
maybe this year.
Josh says, I have a noob question. I'm a junior DBA. Actually, I'm the only DBA because our senior DBA retired. It might have literally meant senior DBA, given that he retired. That's
Yep.
wondering what kind of things I should be looking at to start moving towards being a senior DBA. Oh, what a good question. Tara, what do you think? Well,
you could get into development. That's what you could start getting into.
Tara, what do you think is the difference between a junior DBA and a senior DBA? If you were going to tell somebody to study or what to work on.
Well, I mean, I think a junior DBA is going to be using the GUI a lot. You're relying on everything in the GUI to do stuff. I will reference junior DBAs and intermediate DBAs when I'm talking about parameter sniffing with my clients. And some clients are at the step where they're either rebooting the box or restarting the service to solve performance issues that they just don't realize are parameter sniffing issues. So a senior DBA is not going to do that type of task. But going from junior DBA to senior DBA, for me, I mean, it was just making sure I was at a company that had lots of technologies in place. I always had somebody with more knowledge than me, helping to guide me. So it's going to be challenging if you're the only person there. Hopefully, I would hope that if someone retired, they would go ahead and replace, hire out for another senior DBA. That way, you have some guidance along the way. One of the things that helped me the most back then, from intermediate to senior, because before that it was just experience and time really, but it was answering questions online, looking at questions online and seeing the ones that were interesting and the ones I didn't understand and trying those out myself. If it was a T-SQL type question, I tried out in Management Studio, and then just looking at people's answers that were highly respected people that had really good answers and trying those solutions out on my own. But once I started answering questions, that's when I really started getting better, because I was testing things on my own, trying to get things to work and learning as I went. So for me, I would highly recommend that you get involved in the SQL Server community and attempting to either answer questions or trying them out separately and not answering the question.
Yeah, I mean, to jump on that, I think I'm not a senior DBA and I would pretend to be one. I've never been a DBA, nor will I ever be one. But I understand a lot what the DBA is supposed to do, because I needed to understand if they were lying or not. And frankly, a lot of times they were, because they were terrible people that I used to work with. But I learned a lot of my information from the SQL Server community. So going to SQL Saturdays, and even attending the summit, which is coming up next month, right? Am I wrong about that? It's next month, a couple of weeks, I think.
Yeah.
But going to those type of events, meeting these people who are actually not only speaking, but actually attending the event and hearing some of the issues that they have and some of the solutions that they've come up with, and even the vendors. You learn a ton of stuff. You get your own sessions just talking to vendors, just like walking up to the Microsoft and say, hey, what do you got for me? And then they'll like, oh, somebody wants to talk to me. And they'll just spill out everything they've got, and you just start asking questions and learning about the stuff that they're doing and some of the problems that they're trying to fix. I think that those are the type of things that will help you push not only the understanding of the issues that a DBA has, but also the solutions that you will encounter when you start seeing the same things.
Buck Woody has this great saying, I'm sure he didn't coin it, but I keep hearing it from him. Do you have 1 year of experience that you've done 10 times in a row, or do you truly have 10 years of unique experience? And when you're the only DBA in a shop, it's really easy to keep doing the same year of experience over and over again. You don't have anybody to mentor you. That's where I adore Tara's approach of going, how can I go out and see new problems that I haven't seen before, and how do I go reproduce them in my own environment? That's probably the best junior to senior type advice I could give somebody, because no matter how well you think you master your own environment, it gets terrifying when you go to look at other people's. Just. Sean says, what is the best practice on page file sizing? If I have 8 gigs of memory or 512 gigs of memory, how big should my page file size be? And none of us remember this off the top of our heads because it's in our setup checklist. If you go get our first responder kit, there's a setup checklist and we link to a page by Microsoft. Basically, you shouldn't be hitting the page file. If you're scratching the disk, you're screwed for performance anyway. So you just need a page file big enough to do a mini dump, and we link you to the Microsoft KB article, which gives you the different file sizes for what it takes to do a mini dump.
And then if you actually call Microsoft for a problem, they'll say you need to do a full dump, unfortunately. So it ends up being, I think, the size of RAM that's required, because we've had to do that where, you know, our page file might have been on C drive, and we had to allocate more space because in order to get the full dump that was required. The mini dump, for whatever reason, wasn't enough information. Yeah. But this could have been, it could have been, you know, several years ago, so maybe things have changed. But we needed the size of RAM.
Yeah, I think they're still doing it kind of as a delay tactic. Hey, why don't you take a full dump on your server with 1 terabyte of RAM? Okay, sure. How do you want me to get that to you?
Yeah.
Well,
True.
Mark says, how is fragmentation actually measured? If an index is 50% fragmented, well, hold on. Yeah, Steve says, follows up with, in the Windows NT days, it was 1.5 times RAM. Yeah, those days are past, though, thank God. Mark says, how is fragmentation actually measured? For example, if an index is 50% fragmented, does that mean for 100 page reads, it actually had to jump around elsewhere to read rows 50 times rather than reading continuously? No, but there's two kinds of fragmentation. There's internal fragmentation and external fragmentation. External fragmentation basically means that the pages are out of order on disk. That only matters if you're reading the data from disk. Because if the data is up in RAM, pop quiz, what does the R stand for in RAM? Your pages don't have to be laid out in order in RAM. It's random access memory. So there's no such thing as defragmenting pages externally when they're up in RAM. Internal page fragmentation means you have empty space on each 8K page. That can affect the number of 8K pages that you have to read. That is a really big deal. But they're measured in different ways. In order to see how they're measured and see which ones matter, search for Brent Ozar, Why Defragmenting Your Indexes Isn't Helping. And I have a session over at Group Buy where I talk about why people are defragging their brains out and yet performance still sucks. All right, well, that's all the questions that we have this week for Office Hours. Thanks, everybody, for hanging out with us, and we will see y'all next week. Stay safe out there, everybody.